In 1858, the River Thames smelled so bad that the British Parliament had to suspend its sessions. They called it the Great Stink. The official story is simple: London had grown too fast, the saws couldn't keep up, and Joseph Bazalgette was hired to fix it. He built 1,100 miles of saws. Problem solved. City saved. Engineering triumph. That's the version in every textbook. But Bazalgette's system was designed to serve a population of 4 million people. London's population in 1858 was 2.5 million. He built for a city that didn't exist yet. That gap, 1.5 million people, already engineered for, sits quietly in the official record. Nobody talks about it much. It's mentioned as foresight, good planning, Victorian prudence. And maybe it was. But when you start pulling that thread, you find it attached to something much larger than one city, one engineer, one era. This documentary doesn't offer conclusions. What it offers is a pattern. A pattern that stretches across continents, across decades, across systems that share a strange and consistent characteristic. They were built for a world slightly larger than the one that existed when the shovel hit the ground. Joseph Bazalgette was, by every account, a brilliant engineer. Born in 1819, he rose through the ranks of British civil engineering during an era when the profession was still defining itself. When the Metropolitan Board of Works hired him in 1856, he had already spent years surveying, planning, drafting. He knew London. He knew its rivers. He knew its geology. And then he drew tunnels wider than the math required. His own explanation, recorded in a memoir fragment cited by historians, was straightforward. He doubled the pipe diameter he calculated as necessary, because he knew he would only get one chance to do this correctly. That's the official explanation. Prudent. Logical. Admirable, even. But doubling a pipe diameter doesn't double its capacity. Because of how fluid dynamics work, because of what engineers call the Hazen-Williams equation, doubling a pipe's diameter increases its flow capacity by roughly 2.5 times. Bazalgette didn't build for twice the need. He built for 2.5 times the need. London's population at the time the tunnels opened in 1865 was approximately 2.8 million. His system's theoretical maximum capacity, close to 7 million. The city didn't reach 7 million until 1911. 4 to 6 years later. That's not foresight. That's anticipation of a scale that should have been, by any rational measure, impossible to predict. You might say, brilliant men plan ahead. And you'd be right. You might say, London was already growing fast. Also right. Population projections existed. Engineers used them. This is not, on its own, a mystery. But London was not the only city doing this. In Paris, Baron Haussmann oversaw the reconstruction of the city's saw network between 1853 and 1870. The new system, designed by Eugene Belgrand, ran 360 miles of navigable tunnels wide enough for maintenance boats. Paris in 1853 had a population of approximately 1 million. Belgrand's system was engineered for a city of 3 to 4 million. Paris didn't reach 3 million until the early 1900s. In Hamburg, after the cholera epidemic of 1892, the city commissioned William Lindley, a British engineer, to redesign its water and sewage infrastructure. Lindley built a system that engineers at the time considered extravagant. Hamburg's population at the time was around 620,000. The system was calibrated for over 1.5 million. Hamburg didn't reach 1.5 million until the 1960s. 3 cities. 3 engineers. 3 separate systems, on 3 separate engineering commissions, in 3 separate countries. All built at roughly double to triple the demographic need. All with the same architectural logic: tunnels, junctions, primary collectors, secondary lines, overflow chambers, a grammar so consistent it looks less like independent invention and more like shared inheritance. The timing raises questions that don't resolve cleanly. What makes this harder to dismiss is not the scale. It's the specificity. Victorian saw systems weren't just big pipes in the ground. They were precision-engineered environments. Bazalgette's tunnels were lined with 318 million bricks, hand-laid, arch-formed, pressure calculated. The mortar compound he specified, a particular blend of Roman cement, was chosen because it hardened underwater. He didn't just build for volume. He built for permanence. Belgrand's Paris system included ventilation shafts spaced at intervals that maintained consistent airflow throughout the tunnel network. Not enough ventilation to eliminate smell entirely, that would come later, but enough to prevent methane accumulation at depths that workmen needed to access. Someone had thought carefully about what it would take to maintain these tunnels for a very long time. Hamburg's system included a pressurized clean water supply running parallel to the waste channels, a dual infrastructure that most cities wouldn't adopt as standard practice until the 20th century. Each of these details, individually, suggests forward thinking. Together, they suggest something closer to a template. A template for a city that hadn't arrived yet. There's a word that gets used, sometimes quietly, sometimes loudly, in discussions like this one. It's a word that carries a lot of weight, too much weight, maybe, for what we actually know. But it keeps appearing. In architecture forums. In urban history debates. In the margins of engineering retrospectives. That word is Tartaria. And before we go any further into the pipes and the tunnels and the mathematics of a city built for ghosts, we should understand where that word comes from, what it meant, and why it keeps showing up in places where the official explanation feels just slightly too thin to cover the gap. The Erie Canal opened in 1825. It connected the Hudson River to Lake Erie, 363 miles of artificial waterway cut through upstate New York, a landscape that was, at the time, largely wilderness. The project took 8 years and cost approximately $7 million, an almost incomprehensible sum for a young republic still paying off its Revolutionary War debts. Governor DeWitt Clinton pushed it through anyway. Critics called it Clinton's ditch. A folly. An embarrassment of ambition. When it opened, the population of the entire western New York region it was meant to serve was roughly 200,000 people. The canal was engineered to move 3,500 tons of cargo per day. At full 1825 capacity, the region generated enough commercial traffic to fill maybe a third of that. The boats moved slowly through mostly empty locks. The infrastructure sat waiting. Within 15 years, the canal was so overwhelmed with traffic that they had to widen it. That's the part that gets recorded as the triumph, the widening, the expansion, the proof that the original vision was correct. But the original vision wasn't just optimistic. It was calibrated to a level of activity that had no precedent, no reliable model, no honest projection to justify it. The people who built the Erie Canal didn't build for the New York of 1825. They built for a New York that didn't exist yet, and then that New York arrived, precisely on schedule, precisely into the infrastructure that had been waiting for it. The British railway network tells a similar story from a different angle. By 1850, Britain had laid approximately 6,000 miles of rail. The country's population was around 21 million. That works out to roughly 1 mile of railway for every 3,500 people, a density that, by any contemporary economic model, was difficult to justify purely on passenger demand. Freight projections helped. Industrial growth projections helped more. But the network expanded faster than either of those models could fully explain. What's more striking is the gauge. Isambard Kingdom Brunel, designing the Great Western Railway in the 1830s, chose a track gauge of 7 feet and a quarter inch, far wider than the standard gauge being adopted elsewhere. His justification was engineering. Wider gauge meant more stable carriages at higher speeds. The Board of Trade eventually forced standardization to the narrower gauge, and Brunel's broad gauge was phased out by 1892. The official history treats this as a miscalculation. An eccentric genius who lost the argument. But Brunel's tunnels, Box Tunnel, the longest railway tunnel in the world when it opened in 1841, were bored to dimensions that went well beyond what his gauge required. Box Tunnel's interior measurements have puzzled engineers for over a century. The clearances on the sides, the height of the arch, the drainage channels cut into the floor, all of it speaks to a structure built for something larger, faster, or heavier than anything running on Victorian rails. The tunnel is still in active use today. It was built for trains that didn't exist when the first charge was set. In the United States, the pattern repeats with unsettling consistency. The water distribution systems built in American cities between 1840 and 1890 share a characteristic that urban historians have noted but rarely emphasized. They were almost universally over-engineered for their immediate populations. Chicago's water intake tunnel, completed in 1867, extended 2 miles into Lake Michigan and was designed to supply 400,000 people. Chicago's population in 1867 was approximately 200,000. Cincinnati's system, completed in 1851, was designed for a city of 300,000. Cincinnati's population at completion, 115,000. Philadelphia's Fairmount Water Works, widely admired, internationally visited, considered an architectural marvel of its era, was scaled to a demand that the city's population didn't generate until nearly 30 years after the system was first commissioned. These aren't marginal discrepancies. We're not talking about engineers rounding up by 10%, adding a safety buffer, thinking ahead by 5 years. We're talking about systems built to double, sometimes triple, the immediate need, and in each case, the population eventually grew into the infrastructure, sometimes within a generation, sometimes across 2, but always arriving, always filling the space that had been prepared. Whether this reflects inheritance from something older, or a convergence of forward-thinking minds operating independently across continents, the administrative similarities are difficult to ignore. Because it isn't just the scale. It's the grammar. The organizational logic of Victorian infrastructure follows a template so consistent across national boundaries that it raises a question engineering history hasn't fully answered. The primary collector feeds the secondary network. The secondary network feeds the tertiary distribution. The junction chambers are spaced at intervals optimized for access and maintenance. The overflow systems are positioned at geographic low points. The ventilation accounts for long-term human occupancy. This template appears in London. It appears in Paris. It appears in Hamburg, Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, and Melbourne. It appears in cities that had no formal engineering communication with each other, in eras before standardized professional publications, before international engineering conferences were a regular institution. The Institution of Civil Engineers in London was founded in 1818. It began publishing its proceedings in 1836. International distribution of those proceedings was limited, inconsistent, and decades behind what would have been needed for this level of cross-continental standardization to occur purely through published knowledge transfer. Something produced this consistency. The most comfortable explanation is that great minds think alike, that when intelligent people face the same problems, they arrive at similar solutions. That's probably true. That's probably part of it. But there's another possibility, one that the historical record doesn't cleanly support and doesn't cleanly refute. The possibility that these engineers weren't inventing a template. They were reading one, inheriting one, working from a set of principles that arrived in their hands already formed, already tested, already optimized for a scale of civilization that their immediate context couldn't quite account for. The word for that civilization, the name that keeps surfacing in the margins of these discussions, in the architectural forums and the history debates and the quiet corners of academic disagreement, is one that carries baggage it may not deserve. Before we can evaluate what that word means now, we have to understand what it meant then, where it came from, who used it first, and why its modern reappearance in these conversations is either the most significant thread in this entire pattern, or the most misleading. The word Tartaria appears on European maps as early as the 13th century. It wasn't a fringe term. It wasn't invented by the internet. For roughly 600 years, Tartaria, sometimes spelled Tartary, was a standard geographic designation used by cartographers, diplomats, traders, and explorers to describe a vast and loosely defined territory stretching from the Caspian Sea eastward through Central Asia and into Siberia. The name appeared on maps published by respected European institutions. It appeared in the writings of Marco Polo. It appeared in diplomatic correspondence between European courts and the empires of the East. Joan Blau's 1662 Atlas, one of the most prestigious cartographic works of the 17th century, includes a full dedicated map titled Tartaria. It shows a territory larger than Europe itself. Nicolas Sanson, the French royal cartographer, mapped it. Herman Moll mapped it. John Speed mapped it. These weren't fringe figures. These were the most authoritative geographical minds of their era. By the mid-19th century, the term had quietly disappeared from official usage. The lands it described were absorbed into the administrative language of the Russian Empire, the Qing dynasty, the Ottoman sphere. Tartaria didn't vanish because it was disproven. It vanished because the political entities that replaced it had no use for the name. That's how geography works. Names change when power changes. The land remains. The modern reinterpretation of Tartaria began, in its current form, sometime around 2017 and 2018, primarily in online spaces, image boards, alternative history forums, early YouTube channels. The argument, in its loosest form, proposed that Tartaria wasn't just a geographic label but a civilization, a global or near-global empire of advanced capability that was either destroyed, collapsed, or deliberately erased from the historical record, leaving behind its infrastructure for subsequent populations to inherit and misattribute. This is where the theory becomes difficult to navigate. Because on one hand, the online Tartaria discourse quickly accumulated the aesthetics of conspiracy thinking, suppressed histories, erased empires, hidden truths. That language, and the communities that adopted it, made the underlying architectural observations easy to dismiss. When serious anomalies get attached to unserious framing, the anomalies tend to get dismissed along with the framing. That's a problem worth naming. On the other hand, the architectural observations themselves, the over-engineered source, the infrastructure built ahead of demand, the cross-continental template, those don't disappear because the community discussing them uses rhetoric that historians find uncomfortable. The evidence invites examination regardless of who's doing the examining. There are, broadly, three interpretive models for what we've been looking at across these three phases. The first is the convergent genius model. Under this reading, the Victorian era produced an unusual concentration of brilliant, forward-thinking engineers who independently arrived at similar solutions because they were facing similar problems. London, Paris, Hamburg, Chicago, all industrializing cities, all experiencing rapid population growth, all dealing with the same sanitation crises, the same pressure to modernize. Convergent problems produce convergent solutions. The over-engineering wasn't mystical. It was the rational response of intelligent people who understood that infrastructure is expensive to rebuild and cheap to overspecify the first time. Bazalgette's doubled pipe diameter was prudence. Brunel's oversized tunnels were ambition. The Erie Canal's excess capacity was optimism. These are the most documented explanations, supported by primary sources, and they deserve to be taken seriously. The second model is the inherited template model. This reading doesn't require a hidden empire or a suppressed civilization. It simply proposes that the cross-continental consistency of Victorian infrastructure reflects a body of engineering knowledge that circulated more broadly and more completely than the official record of publications and institutional correspondence suggests. Engineering knowledge travels with engineers. British engineers worked in Hamburg. French engineers worked in Egypt. American engineers trained in Europe and returned home. What looks like independent convergence may actually be a shared professional inheritance, a set of principles, proportions, and organizational logics that move through informal networks, personal relationships, and undocumented knowledge transfer. Under this model, the template is real. Its origin is simply more mundane than the alternative histories suggest. The third model is the one that the word Tartaria points toward, imprecisely and controversially. The preceding civilization model. This reading proposes that some of the infrastructure attributed to Victorian engineers was not, in fact, built from scratch in the 19th century, that some portion of what we call Victorian engineering was built on foundations, inside structures, or according to designs that predate the engineers credited with them. The Mudflood hypothesis, which circulates in the same online communities, suggests that a significant portion of older urban infrastructure lies beneath current ground level, buried not by gradual accumulation but by some faster, less well-documented process. This model is the least supported by conventional academic sources and the most dependent on inference from architectural anomaly. It is also the one that generates the most emotional investment, both from those who believe it and from those who dismiss it. All three models look at the same evidence. They arrive at very different places. Which brings us back to 1816. That year is sometimes called the year without a summer. A volcanic eruption, Mount Tambora, in what is now Indonesia, had sent enough ash into the atmosphere to lower global temperatures by an average of 0.4 to 0.7 degrees Celsius. Crops failed across the northern hemisphere. Famine followed in parts of Europe and North America. Populations moved. Social structures strained. It's a strange year to return to in a documentary about Victorian sores. But it matters for one specific reason. The year without a summer is, in some Tartaria adjacent theories, proposed as a potential marker, a moment of catastrophic disruption that separated a preceding era of civilization from the one that followed. The engineers who built the Victorian infrastructure would have been born in its immediate aftermath. The cities they built for would have been recovering from it. The disconnect between what was built and what was immediately needed might, under this reading, reflect not foresight but memory, the engineering of people who remembered or inherited the memory of a world larger than the one they currently inhabited. That's a poetic reading. It may be nothing more than poetic. But the poetry points at something real. The gap between the scale of what was built and the scale of what existed to use it is not fully explained by any single model. Not by genius. Not by template. Not by mythology. The saws of London are still in use. Bazalgette's brickwork, laid by hand in the 1860s, still carries wastewater beneath a city of 9 million people. The system has been supplemented, extended, augmented, but the original tunnels remain at its core, doing the work they were designed to do, for a population that took 4 decades to arrive. What that means is genuinely open. It might mean that great engineers build beyond their moment because that's what great engineers do. It might mean that knowledge circulates in ways that formal history doesn't fully capture. It might mean something stranger, something the vocabulary of mainstream history isn't quite equipped to describe. Or it might mean that the most important infrastructures are always built for someone who hasn't arrived yet, and that the most honest thing we can say about the Victorian engineers is that they prepared a world they would never fully inhabit, for people they would never meet, at a scale they couldn't entirely justify. And those people came. They always came.